The rig was falling, 400 pounds of steel dropping toward the stage, one snapped cable at a time. The fired janitor reached the control panel first. His hands moved across the override switches with a precision nobody in the room had ever seen on a convention center floor. Vance grabbed his arm. "You don't work here anymore." Elias didn't look at it. He looked at the load distribution display. "Everyone in this room dies if I stop," he said, and he kept working.
Absolute evil. He just crushed a veteran's only heirloom and had no idea who he was messing with. Keep watching.
The convention center breathed with a low electrical hum. It pressed into Elias's ears like a living thing. He pushed his mop across the polished concrete floor, slow, steady, invisible. The industrial bleach rose in sharp, stinging waves from the bucket at his feet. It mixed with the cold, recycled air of the stadium. His uniform was faded. It was stiff with chemical residue. The pale green fabric hung from his frame, washed to near colorlessness from hundreds of shifts. Above him, the $500, $1,000 suspended VIP lighting rig blazed with fresh, blinding light. It cast sharp, dramatic shadows across the gleaming stage. Elias did not look up at it. He kept his eyes down. He kept moving. Vance stood near the center stage, holding his digital clipboard with both hands. He was dressed in a perfectly pressed charcoal suit. His Italian leather shoes caught the light with every step. He had not stopped talking since 6 a.m. His voice carried across the open floor like a blade, sharp, precise, designed to cut. "This section is still wet," Vance said. He did not look at Elias. He gestured toward the far left corridor with 2 fingers. "I need it dry. I needed it dry 20 minutes ago. What exactly do you do all day?" Elias said nothing. He redirected the mop. He moved toward the corridor. His jaw was set quiet, controlled, the kind of quiet that belongs to men who have learned to survive in silence. He had learned it young. He had sharpened it in the army. He had perfected it in places that do not appear on any civilian map. Vance followed 3 steps behind. He never helped. He observed, cataloged, and criticized. It was the only work he knew. "The lighting crew will be here at noon," Vance announced. He checked his clipboard. "I want this entire floor cleared, mopped, dried, and completely invisible, like you." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Elias wrung out the mop head over the metal bucket. The gray water ran down in thin, dirty streams. His hands were scarred across the knuckles. Each scar was a different story. Most of them were stories no one had ever asked him to tell. He thought of Margaret. He thought of the hospital room, the pale walls, the sound of machines breathing for her when she could not breathe alone. He thought of the number the billing department had quoted him last Thursday. Large, specific, devastating. He thought of the insurance card tucked in the left breast pocket of this faded uniform. That card was the reason he was here. That card was the reason he said nothing. He moved the mop again. Forward, back, like a tide. "Move faster," Vance said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The contempt was already in every syllable, flat, practiced, efficient. "I'm not running a rehabilitation center. I'm running a summit." Elias moved the mop. Forward, back. He did not answer. Above him, near the far edge of the main rig, a series of steel suspension cables ran taut from the ceiling anchors down to the main load platform. Elias had noticed them when he first arrived at 5 a.m. He noticed things like that. He always had. It was not a habit he had chosen. It was a habit the army had installed in him so deeply it had become instinct. He counted the cables now without meaning to. He noted the slight angle on the third cable from the left. He noted the small irregular discoloration near the upper bracket. His lips moved slightly. Numbers, load estimations, stress point calculations, quiet, precise, unconscious. He had once built a bridge under enemy fire in a river valley that no longer exists on any current map. He had done it in 6 hours with 4 men and damaged equipment. The math had been identical. The stakes had been higher. "Are you listening to me?" Vance's voice snapped across the floor. Elias blinked. He returned his eyes to the wet concrete. "Yes, sir," he said. His voice was level, calm, measured. It had no edges left to catch on anything. Vance studied him for a moment. He seemed briefly, almost imperceptibly unsatisfied by the absence of reaction. Then he turned. He walked back toward the stage. His shoes struck the floor with clean, sharp authority. Click, click, click. Elias watched the third cable. He let the calculation finish in the back of his mind. He did not know, standing there in his faded chemical-stained uniform beneath $500,000 of borrowed light, that in approximately 11 hours that number would matter more than anything else in the room. He did not know that the answer he was already calculating would be the only thing standing between 200 people and the ceiling. He wrung the mop out again. He pushed it forward. He swallowed his pride for Margaret's sake. He had been swallowing it for 8 months. It sat in his chest now like a stone smooth from use. He could carry it. He had carried heavier. But there was something else in his chest tonight. Something older. Something that had survived war zones and debt and silence and grief. It had no name. It simply waited. And in a few hours, pride would not be enough for what was coming. What was coming would require something far more dangerous. It would require everything he had ever been before the mop, before the faded uniform, before the name tag that read only Elias in small black letters above a pocket that held his wife's insurance card and nothing else. The catering crew arrived at 9:30. They moved through the service corridor in a quiet, efficient line. Silver trays, covered dishes, the sharp, clean smell of fresh coffee cutting through the industrial bleach that still clung to the air. Elias stepped aside to let them pass. He pressed his back against the corridor wall. He held his mop handle vertical against his chest. He waited. He was good at waiting. Vance was not good at waiting. He appeared at the corridor entrance with his clipboard raised and his eyes already scanning for something wrong. He found it immediately. He always did. The catering lead had placed a full tray of fresh coffee service directly on the corner of the prep table. The table sat at the edge of the main floor entrance. Vance walked past it without slowing. His elbow caught the edge of the tray. The tray tilted. The coffee went first, then the cups, then the entire arrangement followed in a single cascading collapse of silver and ceramic and steaming brown liquid across 6 feet of clean, polished floor. Vance stopped. He looked down at the spreading stain. He looked at Elias. "Clean it," he said. He did not apologize to the catering lead. He did not acknowledge that his elbow had struck the tray. He turned back to his clipboard. "All of it. Now. I need this floor clear before the lighting crew touches anything." Elias set the mop handle against the wall. He retrieved the clean cloth rags from the lower shelf of his cart. He lowered himself to his knees on the wet, coffee-soaked floor. His knees pressed into the cold, hard tile. The liquid was still hot. It seeped through the thin fabric of his uniform trousers immediately. He did not flinch. He pressed the cloth flat against the floor. He began to work in slow, deliberate sections. His movements were methodical, unhurried, precise. The same hands that had once cleared explosive ordnance from a collapsed road in a country whose name Vance could not have found on a map were now pressing rags against spilled coffee on a convention center floor. Toby watched from the far side of the corridor. He was 19. He had the particular wide-eyed stillness of someone who had not yet learned to look away from things that were wrong. He stood near the cable staging area with a length of coiled wire in both hands. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply watched. Vance paced the edge of the spill. He narrated corrections to his clipboard. He did not look at Elias directly. He spoke about him in the third person to no one in a tone that was quiet, deliberate, and designed to land. "Incredible," he said. 8 months on this property and the man still hasn't learned basic flow management. He clicked his pen. "Some people just aren't built for efficiency." Elias pressed the rag flat. He moved to the next section. The loading dock doors at the far end of the corridor were open. The morning air pushed through them in slow, freezing waves. It came from somewhere outside, somewhere gray and without warmth. It moved across the wet floor and pressed against Elias's knees, his hands the back of his neck. He absorbed it without shifting position. Cold was familiar. Cold was manageable. He had been cold in places where cold meant something entirely different than discomfort. He reached back toward his cleaning cart for the second rag. His hand found the shelf by instinct. His fingers closed around something small, round, and solid. He knew immediately what it was. He knew it the way you know something that has lived in your hands for 40 years. He lifted it without thinking. He held it for one breath. The pocket watch was antique silver, worn smooth at the edges from decades of handling. His grandfather had carried it through a war. His father had carried it through a harder peace. Elias had carried it through everything in between. The crystal face was intact. The hands still moved. He checked the time not because he needed to know the hour, but because holding it and checking the time was a ritual. It was the one small private moment in each shift that belonged entirely to him. He set it on the top shelf of the cart. He returned to the floor. He did not see Vance stop pacing. He did not see Vance turn. He did not see Vance's eyes locate the watch on the cart shelf. He did not see the brief specific calculation that crossed Vance's face. The look of a man who has identified something precious to someone beneath him and has already decided what to do with that information. Vance walked to the cart. He lifted the watch between two fingers. He held it up to the light with the expression of a man examining something distasteful. "What is this?" he said. His voice was light conversational, almost curious. "Is this yours?" Elias looked up from the floor. He saw the watch in Vance's hand. Something moved through his face, brief, controlled, and immediately suppressed. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'll put it away." "You'll put it away," Vance repeated. He turned the watch over once. He read nothing on its surface that interested him. He set it back down, but not on the shelf. He set it on the edge, the very edge. A placement that was not accidental. Nothing Vance did was accidental. "You're on my clock," he said. His voice dropped quiet, flat, final. "On my clock in my building, on your hands and knees. You don't get to have distractions." He pressed one finger to the watch's edge. It fell. The sound it made against the tile was small. A short, sharp click of silver striking polished stone. It landed face up. The crystal held for 1 full second. Elias was already moving to rise when Vance's heel came down. The $2,000 Italian leather sole pressed directly onto the crystal face, slowly, with intention. The sound that followed was not a crack. It was a collapse, a grinding, layered implosion of glass and brass and the compressed history of 3 generations. The gears caught and twisted and split apart beneath the weight. Vance turned his foot once, a slow, deliberate rotation, like extinguishing something. Then he stepped back. He looked at Elias. He smiled. It was a small smile, precise and completely empty. "Clean this up, too," he said. He walked away. Elias did not move. He remained on his knees. He looked at what was left on the floor. Fragments of silver casing, scattered gears, small and bright and meaningless now. Glass powder. The watch hands separated from everything that had held them, lying still for the first time in 40 years. His own hand still holding the wet rag pressed flat against the floor to either side of the wreckage. He did not breathe for a moment. From across the corridor, Toby had gone completely white. The coiled cable was still in his hands. He had not moved. He had watched every second of it. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were fixed on Elias, not on Vance, on Elias, on the stillness, on the particular terrible quality of a man absorbing something catastrophic without making a sound. In the far back row of the main hall, a deaf, elderly sound technician sat alone at the edge of a long equipment table. He had a pair of headphones resting around his neck and a cup of black coffee near his left hand. He had not moved in some time. His eyes, however, had not left the corridor entrance. They were still sharp and entirely too precise for a man who was supposedly unaware of anything happening around him. Elias picked up the first gear, then the second. He gathered the pieces slowly, one by one, into his palm. He closed his fingers around them. He held the shattered remains of everything his grandfather had carried and his father had carried and he had carried. He held it all in one scarred hand. His knuckles were white. His face was still. He had survived worse. He had survived things that had no name in civilian language. He told himself that now, in the cold corridor, on his knees on the coffee-stained floor. He told himself that the watch was only an object. He almost believed it. But Vance's petty victory was already an illusion. The real test had not even begun. Vance returned at 11. He came through the main hall entrance with his clipboard raised and his pace set to the particular rhythm of a man who had decided in advance that everything he was about to see would disappoint him. He was right by his own standards. The audio equipment staging area was still incomplete. The heavy black cables, thick as a man's forearm, lay coiled in long, tangled rows across the service floor. They needed to move. They needed to move across the full length of the stadium from the eastern staging dock to the main soundboard platform near the front of the stage. It was approximately 200 feet of distance. The cables weighed in total close to 80 pounds. The deaf technician was already there. He sat on a low equipment case near the staging dock. He was old. His frame was slight narrow at the shoulder, careful in the way that men become careful when their bodies have stopped being reliable. His white hair was cropped short. His clothing was plain dark, unremarkable. He wore a hearing aid in his left ear and a pair of technician's headphones around his neck. He had a cup of black coffee near his right hand and a small notebook open on his knee. He was writing something in it slowly in very small letters. He did not look up when Vance entered. Vance looked at the cables. He looked at the technician. He looked back at the cables. "Hey." He snapped his fingers twice in the direction of the old man. Nothing. He stepped closer. He raised his voice to a register that was not quite a shout, but was designed to be felt rather than heard. "You, the cables, they need to go to the main board. All of them. Now." He pointed. He used the slow, exaggerated gestures of a man who believed that volume and pantomime together constituted communication with anyone he considered beneath full comprehension. The technician looked up. He studied Vance's face with calm, unhurried attention. He set his pen down on the notebook. He looked at the cables. He looked at Vance again. He nodded once slowly. He reached down and closed his fingers around the first coil. Vance watched him struggle with it for approximately 4 seconds. The cable was dense, heavy, resistant. The old man's fingers were thin. His wrist bent at a difficult angle as he tried to lift the coil from the floor. He got it perhaps 6 inches from the ground before the weight redistributed and the coil slipped sideways. He adjusted his grip. He tried again. The cable moved another inch. "Unbelievable," Vance said. He made a note on his clipboard. Not about the cables, about the time. "I needed this done 40 minutes ago." Elias had entered through the side corridor 2 minutes before Vance arrived. He had come for the secondary mop bucket. He had not planned to stay. He stood now at the entrance to the staging area, his hands still on the corridor door, watching the old man's wrists bend against the weight of the cable coil. He set the mop handle against the wall. He crossed the staging area in 12 steps. He crouched beside the old man. He did not speak. He did not ask permission. He simply positioned his hands beneath the main coil, adjusted his grip to the load's center of gravity, and lifted. His spine was straight. His knees drove the movement from below. His shoulders absorbed the shift of weight with the automatic practice precision of a man who had spent years lifting things that were not designed to be lifted by one person alone. The coil came up clean. He draped it across his left shoulder. He reached for the second coil with his right hand. He lifted that one from the floor, added it to the first, and redistributed the combined weight across both shoulders with a small, deliberate adjustment of his stance. 80 pounds of cable settled against the muscle and scar tissue of a man who had once carried a wounded soldier and a full combat pack up a collapsed hillside in the dark. The old technician sat back on his equipment case. He folded his hands in his lap. He watched Elias's posture. He watched the shoulder set. He watched the knee angle and the weight distribution and the absence of any wasted motion. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, quiet and specific, like a lens finding its focus. "What are you doing?" Vance's voice crossed the room like a dropped tool. Hard, flat, unplanned. He was staring at Elias. "Moving the cables," Elias said. His voice was even direct and entirely without apology. "You're supposed to be finishing the East Corridor floor." Vance stepped forward. He held the clipboard flat against his chest, now both arms crossed over it. "I didn't authorize a task change. You don't reassign yourself." "The floor's done," Elias said. He began moving toward the main board platform. His stride was measured weight forward, absorbing the load with each step. The thick, dirty cables pressed into the curve of his neck and shoulder. They were cold from the loading dock air. The edges of the outer sheathing were rough, worn in places, cut through in others where years of use had ground them against concrete edges. They pressed into Elias's skin through the thin fabric of his uniform with a dull, steady bite. He felt the burn begin in the right trapezius at step 8. He noted it. He did not slow down. "I'm talking to you," Vance said. He followed. His shoes struck the floor in short, aggressive beats. I'm talking to you and you're walking away from me. I hear you, sir, Elias said. He did not stop. Vance moved ahead of him. He stepped into Elias's path. He stopped there, clipboard-raised chin, level eyes set with the particular cold fury of a man who was not accustomed to being disregarded. Put them down, he said. His voice was quiet now. Quiet was worse than loud coming from Vance. Quiet meant he had made a decision. Put them down, go back to the East Corridor and let the contracted technician do his contracted work. That's how this building operates. Elias looked at him. He held the 80 pounds of cable without shifting his stance. He looked at Vance the way you look at a weather system, noting its direction, estimating its force, determining the appropriate response without assigning it more importance than it deserves. The contracted technician, Elias said, is 70 years old. He kept his eyes on Vance. I'll put these down at the main board. He moved around him. Vance turned. The muscle at his jaw worked once. His hand tightened on the clipboard with a pressure that whitened his knuckles. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He made a note. The note was sharp and deliberate and written with the energy of a man composing a consequence. You will regret making this difficult, he said. He said it to Elias's back. Elias's back did not answer. Toby was near the main board platform. He was pretending to sort connection cables. He was not sorting them. He was watching. He watched Elias cover the remaining distance to the platform, watched him lower the cable coils with the same clean, deliberate precision with which he had lifted them, watched the controlled release of each coil onto the staging mat with zero excess motion. Toby had grown up around his father's construction sites. He knew the difference between a man who had been taught to lift and a man who had been built by it. This was something different from both. This was muscle memory so deep it had become architecture. At the back of the room, the old technician had not reached for his coffee. He had not returned to his notebook. He sat with his hands still folded in his lap, watching Elias walk back across the floor toward the side corridor. He watched the shoulder set. He watched the stride. He watched the way the man carried the residual weight of those cables in his posture even after setting them down, the slight forward lean, the measured breath, the controlled re-entry into stillness. He nodded once. It was a small nod, private. It was the nod of a man who has just confirmed something he already suspected. His eyes returned to the middle distance. He picked up his coffee. He did not drink it immediately. He held it in both hands and he was still watching, still calculating from behind the quiet, unremarkable face of a man who was supposedly aware of nothing at all. Vance stood at the center of the room. He held his clipboard. How was the loudest thing in a space that had gone very still around him? He thought he was king of this arena. He moved through it with that certainty intact, polished, and entirely unchallenged. He could not see what the old man in the back row could see. He could not see the shape of what was gathering quiet and patient in the space directly around him. He was blind to the crown. He was blind to the man who held it. He had been blind since he walked in the door. Elias picked up his mop handle from the corridor wall. He returned to work. The burning in his right shoulder settled into a steady, familiar ache. He had carried heavier. He would carry more before this day ended. He did not yet know how much more. But somewhere in the back of his mind, in the part that had never fully left the war zone, the calculation was already running.
Wait, he just stomped on an old man's family heirloom and forced him to carry heavy cables. If that were me, I wouldn't have kept my mouth shut. Imagine swallowing that kind of abuse just to keep your wife alive. The audacity is real.
The final stage walkthrough began at 2 p.m. Vance led it personally. He moved across the main stage platform with his clipboard raised and his eyes tracking every surface, every cable run, every positioned light fixture with the focused, relentless attention of a man who found his only genuine satisfaction in the identification of imperfection. The summit was 7 hours away. The VIP seating was arranged in curved rows below the stage. The catering stations were dressed and covered. The lighting rig above burned at full test capacity, throwing clean white light across every inch of the polished stage floor. It looked perfect. Vance was determined to find where it wasn't. He moved from the stage left wing to the center mark narrating corrections into a small recording device he kept clipped to his lapel. Microphone stand placement, carpet alignment at the podium, the precise angle of the front-facing monitor speakers. He spoke in the clipped, efficient shorthand of a man who expected his observations to be acted upon before he finished making them. Toby followed 3 steps behind, tablet in hand, logging each correction as it came. His stylus moved fast. His face was carefully blank. He had learned over the past 6 hours the particular economy of expression required to survive a full day in Vance's proximity. Elias was at the far edge of the stage near the wing entrance. Howe was not supposed to be on the stage floor. His work area for this hour was the service corridor behind the east seating bank. He had come through the wing entrance to retrieve a forgotten cleaning caddy that a crew member had left near the monitor stack. He picked it up. He turned to leave. He stopped. It was not a sound exactly. Not yet. It was the anticipation of a sound, a vibration at a frequency slightly below what the room was producing. A pressure change so subtle, it would have registered as nothing to anyone who had not spent years in environments where the difference between a subtle pressure change and a catastrophic structural failure was measured in seconds. Elias stood completely still. He looked up. The main suspension rig stretched the full width of the stage ceiling. It was a massive engineered platform of welded steel and aluminum alloy carrying the weight of the primary lighting array, the atmospheric effect units, and approximately 400 feet of power and data cabling. It was suspended from 12 anchor points drilled into the convention center's structural ceiling. The suspension cables ran from each anchor point down to the rig's outer frame in a precise geometric pattern taut and calibrated to distribute the load evenly across all 12 connection points. He counted the cables automatically. He checked the angles. He followed the line of the third cable from the stage left anchor. He followed it up to the bracket. He looked at the bracket for a long moment. Then it came. A single microscopic high-pitched ping. It lasted less than a quarter of a second. It came from somewhere near the upper stage left anchor cluster. It was the sound of metal under stress releasing a fraction of its tension. It was the sound of something that had been holding, deciding not to hold anymore. Elias knew that sound. He had heard it twice before in his life. Once on a temporary bridge in a river valley 20 minutes before the bridge failed. Once inside a collapsed building during a recovery operation 4 seconds before the secondary collapse. Both times he had moved. Both times moving had been the correct decision. He set the cleaning caddy down on the stage floor. He crossed the stage toward the main winch control panel mounted in the stage left wing beside the technical power board. The panel was a large gray metal housing with a digital display and a series of manual override controls behind a locked plexiglass cover. It was a military-grade hydraulic system, the kind used in heavy-load stage rigging and in a previous iteration of the same technology in combat engineering equipment. Elias recognized the model immediately. He had operated its predecessor in the field. He noted the lock type on the plexiglass cover. He noted the digital display readout. He noted the current load distribution numbers on the screen and ran them against the rig's visible geometry in his head. The numbers were wrong, not dramatically, not in a way that would trigger the automated alarm threshold, but wrong enough and wrong in a specific enough pattern that anyone who understood what the numbers meant would feel it in the back of their throat. "What are you doing up here?" Vance's voice came from the center stage. He had turned from the monitor speakers. He was looking at Elias with the expression he reserved for things that had appeared in places they did not belong. Elias turned from the control panel. "The load distribution on the main rig is showing an anomaly," he said. His voice was level, factual, the tone of a man reporting a measurement. "The stage left anchor cluster is reading a differential of approximately 12% above balanced load. That kind of variance in a suspension system this size—" "Stop!" Vance walked toward him. His shoes struck the stage floor in sharp, clean beats. "Stop talking. You are a janitor. You clean floors. You do not read load distribution panels. You do not evaluate rigging systems. You do not," he said, arriving at arm's length and dropping his voice to its quietest register, "stand on my stage during a final walkthrough and invent structural problems to justify being somewhere you have no business being." "I'm not inventing it," Elias said. "The third cable from the stage left anchor is showing visible geometric deviation from—" "I have a certified rigging crew," Vance said. He spoke over him without raising his voice. "I have a licensed structural engineer who signed off on this rig at 8 this morning. I have a summit in 7 hours with 400 guests. 60 of whom are the personal contacts of the man who funds this entire operation. He held Elias's eyes. And I have a janitor standing on my stage touching my equipment telling me my rig is broken. Which of those things is the problem right now? Elias said nothing. He looked at the cables. He looked back at Vance. Leave the stage, Vance said. He stepped back. He made a note. Leave the stage, return to your assigned area, and do not come back up here. If I see you on this stage floor again before the summit, I will have you removed from the property. Elias picked up the cleaning caddy. He looked at the stage left anchor cluster one final time. The third cable hung at its angle, still, patient, holding for now. The control panel display threw a faint green glow across the wing wall behind it. The numbers on the display had not changed. He walked off the stage. He moved through the wing entrance and back into the service corridor. The corridor was cold and echoey and smelled of concrete and industrial cleaning fluid. He set the caddy against the wall. He pressed his back against the corridor wall beside it. He stood there in the cold, in the shadow, in the particular silence of a man who has been told not to see something he has already seen. Somewhere behind him in the stage left wing, a single steel bolt worked itself free from the upper anchor bracket. It fell. It struck the polished imported marble floor of the stage with a sharp, precise click. It came to rest 6 inches in front of where Vance was standing. Vance looked at it. He looked up briefly. He looked back at his clipboard. He stepped over it. He continued his walkthrough. Toby did not step over it. He crouched. He picked it up. He turned it over in his fingers. It was a large, bolt-thick hexagonal, the kind designed to carry significant continuous load. The threads at one end were worn in a pattern that was not consistent with normal use. They were worn in the specific tapering pattern of a fastener that had been vibrating under uneven stress for an extended period of time. Toby did not know enough to read that pattern fully, but he knew enough to feel something cold move through him as he held it. He looked up at the anchor cluster. He looked at the corridor entrance where Elias had disappeared. He stood up slowly. He put the bolt in his pocket. In the far back corner of the hall, the deaf technician had moved from his equipment table. He was now seated in the back row of the VIP seating section directly below the stage left anchor cluster. He had a technical manual open across his knees. He was not reading it. His eyes were on the ceiling. His coffee was untouched and cold beside his left foot. He sat with the stillness of a man who was waiting for something specific in a specific place at a specific time. The stage was set for a multi-million-dollar disaster, and the only man who could stop it had just been told to leave. Vance found him at 3:15. Elias was in the east service corridor on his knees beside the floor drain, clearing the last of the post-catering debris from the channel grate. His hands worked by feel. The corridor was dim, lit by a single overhead fluorescent that had been flickering for 6 hours without anyone filing a maintenance request. He did not need full light for this. He had done it enough times that his hands knew the sequence without instruction. Lift the grate, clear the channel, replace the grate, move to the next one. He heard Vance's shoes before he heard his voice. Click, click, click. The sound came down the corridor from the main hall entrance, sharp and regular and carrying the particular rhythm of a man arriving with a purpose already formed. Elias did not look up. He replaced the grate. He moved to the next drain. Vance stopped 2 feet behind him. "Stand up," he said. Elias stood. He turned. He held the grate tool at his side. His uniform was damp at the knees, stained at the cuffs, carrying the accumulated evidence of 11 hours of continuous work. He looked at Vance. He waited. Vance was holding a single sheet of paper. It was pink. Bright institutional pink, the color of official process of forms filled out in triplicate of decisions already made before the conversation began. He held it at chest height between 2 fingers extended toward Elias with the deliberate presentation of a man who had been looking forward to this moment. "You're done," Vance said. "Effective immediately. Conduct unobserving trespassing on restricted stage area interference with technical equipment." He recited the listed violations with the clean, rehearsed fluency of a man who had written them himself. "Security will escort you from the property in 10 minutes. Leave your access card and your equipment at the service desk." He pushed the pink slip forward another inch. "Sign it." Elias looked at the paper. He looked at Vance. He took the termination slip. He held it in both hands. His hands were calloused, scarred, stained with cleaning fluid and drained debris and the residue of 11 hours of invisible labor. The bright pink paper looked wrong against them, like a wound in the wrong color. He did not sign it. He did not speak. Vance waited 3 seconds. He mistook the silence for compliance. He was already turning back toward the main hall when Elias looked down at the paper again and felt something he had not felt in 8 months. Not anger. Anger was too simple, too hot, too easy to manage. This was something older and colder and far more precise. It was the particular grief of a man who has held himself together with complete disciplined intention across an enormous span of time and damage and who is now watching the last thing holding him together get pulled away cleanly without ceremony by someone who does not know and does not care what it cost to build. The insurance card was in his left breast pocket. He could feel its edge against his ribs through the fabric. Margaret's name was on it, her coverage number, her treating physician's name printed in small standard font on a card that now meant nothing because the job it was attached to was in his hands in pink. He thought about the billing number from last Thursday. He thought about the hospital room, the machines, the pale walls, the particular sound of a woman who loves you trying not to let you see that she is afraid. He thought about the morning he had taken this job, the specific private negotiation he had made with himself in the parking lot before his first shift, that he would do whatever it required, that he would be invisible if invisible was what was required, that nothing Vance or anyone else in this building could say to him would matter more than the card in his pocket and the woman it was connected to. He had kept that negotiation for 8 months. It was over now. The termination slip was in his hands. The insurance was gone. The job was gone. The thing he had traded his dignity for piece by piece across 240 shifts was gone. He stood with that for a moment. He let it be exactly as heavy as it was. Then the ceiling groaned. It was not subtle this time. I was standing in a dim corridor with a flickering light overhead and a pink piece of paper and $12 and the broken gears of his grandfather's watch in a small envelope in his right hip pocket, and he was 58 years old and he had served his country in places that had broken better men, and he was on his knees in a convention center and none of it had been enough. It was not the microscopic ping of a bolt under uneven stress. It was the full resonant structural groan of thousands of pounds of loaded steel shifting against a suspension system that was no longer holding its geometry. It moved through the corridor wall and into the concrete floor and up through the soles of Elias's shoes. It lasted approximately 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, the sound rose peaked and resolved into a rapid-fire sequence of sharp sequential cracks that came from the stage-left anchor cluster above the main hall. Pop. Pop, 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 pop. Each one was clean, precise, separate. Each one was a suspension cable giving way under a load it could no longer distribute. Elias had heard that sound before, in a different country, in a different language of destruction. But the physics were identical, universal, and completely without ambiguity. He knew exactly what it meant. He stood in the corridor. The pink slip was still in his hands. He looked at it. He looked at the wall between him and the main hall. He thought about Vance. He thought about the 400 chairs set in curved rows below the stage. He thought about the summit guests who would be in those chairs in less than 7 hours. He thought about the 60 VIPs. He thought about Toby. He thought about the old technician in the back row. I thought about all of it in approximately 1 second, the way men who have trained for emergency assessment think not sequentially but simultaneously, in a single, comprehensive, unambiguous picture. The picture was clear. He dropped the pink slip. It fell from his hands and settled on the wet corridor floor. It landed face up. The word terminated was visible in bold standard font across the top of the page. The bright pink paper lay flat against the dark, wet concrete, and Elias was already moving. He went through the corridor door at a controlled sprint, not panic, precision. His body shifted into the specific physical register it had not occupied in years, the register of someone moving toward a problem rather than away from it, the register of training and repetition, and the absolute irreversible understanding that hesitation has a body count. He came through the main hall entrance and crossed the floor toward the stage in 15 seconds. The rig had dropped, not fully, not yet. But the stage left side had descended approximately 8 inches from its calibrated position. The third cable from the stage-left anchor was gone. The fourth was fraying visibly, its outer sheathing split and the interior wire strands fanning apart under the redistributed load. The remaining anchor cables were vibrating under a stress they had not been engineered to carry alone. The rig was tilted now, a subtle but catastrophic angle, throwing its full weight toward the stage left edge with a slow, grinding mechanical persistence. Vance was on the stage floor. He had not run. He appeared to have simply stopped. He stood at the center mark with his clipboard hanging from one hand and his face wearing the specific expression of a man whose entire operating model for the world has just stopped functioning. He was not screaming yet. He was past the register of immediate reaction and stuck in the gap before his body decided what came next. His eyes were on the ceiling. His feet had not moved. Elias reached the stage left wing in 4 more seconds. He went directly to the control panel. He did not look at Vance. He did not assess the room for audience. He assessed the panel. The plexiglass cover was locked with a standard digital key code, a 4-digit commercial security lock of the type used on high-value rigging equipment. It was not a sophisticated system. It was a deterrent, not a barrier, designed to prevent accidental access by untrained personnel. Elias was not untrained personnel. He entered the first sequence. Wrong. He entered the second. The panel beeped once, sharp and flat. He looked at the display. He looked at the physical housing. He identified the system manufacturer from the panel badge. He identified the model generation from the control layout. He reached into the specific deep pocket of his memory where the military bypass codes for this system's predecessor lived, the codes that had been drilled into him during his second deployment in a time when rigging system meant something built under fire in a place with no civilian infrastructure. He entered the bypass sequence. The plexiglass cover released with a clean mechanical click. Vance backed away from the center mark. 1 step, then 2. Then he was off the stage entirely and pressing himself against the front row seating barrier with both hands flat on the barrier rail and his face turned upward, watching the rig tilt and vibrate and groan above the stage he had been managing for 6 months. It was breathing in short, audible increments. He was very afraid. Elias's hands moved across the manual override controls. He was not afraid. Fear was information, and he had already processed it. What remained was the problem, and the problem had a solution, and the solution required his hands to move correctly across a panel he had not touched in 11 years, in a building he was no longer legally authorized to be inside on behalf of people who did not know he existed. He worked the winch controls. Left primary, right compensating. The hydraulic system engaged with a deep, resonant thrum that traveled up through the panel housing and into his palms. The rig shuddered. It resisted. It groaned with the specific metallic reluctance of a loaded system being asked to change direction under stress. Elias held the controls. He adjusted the differential. He felt the resistance change. He adjusted again. I was reading the system through his hands the way he had once read terrain through his boots, by feel, by pressure, by the language of physical feedback that no manual had ever fully translated into words. The rig stopped descending. It hung vibrating at approximately 10 inches below its calibrated position. The remaining cables were still under excessive load. The system was not stable, but it was no longer falling. Elias held the controls. I made 3 further adjustments. Small, precise sequential redistributing the hydraulic load across the remaining functional anchors with the careful attention of a man who understood that the difference between stabilized and collapsed was measured in fractions. The vibration diminished. The groaning resolved into silence. He held the position. On the main control display, the green text appeared in clean, backlit letters, "Override successful." The hall was absolutely quiet. Toby stood at the main board platform. He had not moved since the first groan. He was staring at Elias. His tablet was on the floor at his feet. He did not remember dropping it. His hand was in his pocket, closed around the bolt he had picked up from the stage floor 2 hours ago. He held it so tightly the hexagonal edges had pressed their shape into his palm. At the back of the main hall, the deaf elderly sound technician rose from his seat in the VIP section. He stood. He closed the technical manual that had been open across his knees. He set his cold coffee on the seat beside him. He straightened his jacket. He walked forward down the center aisle of the curved VIP seating toward the stage at a pace that was unhurried, deliberate, and entirely unbothered by the tilted rig hanging 10 inches out of position above the stage-left platform. He walked the way a man walks when he owns the building. Vance opened his mouth. He looked at Elias, still at the control panel, both hands on the override controls, holding the weight of the rig and the hydraulic system through the pressure of his grip. He looked at the old man walking down the center aisle. He looked at the override successful text on the display. He looked back at Elias. His mouth was still open. Nothing came out. Vance had backed away in pure terror. I was completely unaware that the man he had just fired was about to become his only hope of survival, and that the old man walking toward him from the back of the room was about to become something far, far worse. The old man walked without hurrying. He came down the center aisle with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes on the stage. He did not look at the tilted rig. He did not look at Vance pressed against the seating barrier with both hands flat on the rail. He did not look at Toby standing at the main board platform with a bolt pressed into his palm. He looked at Elias, only at Elias. He walked the full length of the aisle and stopped at the stage apron directly below the control panel wing and stood there with the particular stillness of a man who has arrived exactly where he intended to be. He reached up and removed the hearing aid from his left ear. He held it for a moment. He looked at it. He set it on the stage apron ledge with the careful, unhurried deliberateness of a man setting down something he no longer needs. He straightened. He looked up at Elias at the control panel. "Hold that position," he said. His voice was clear, measured. It carried across the silent hall without effort, without strain, with the practiced natural authority of a man who had spent decades in rooms where his word was the final word. His diction was precise. His cadence was unhurried. He spoke the way men speak when they have never needed volume to be heard. "Don't release the override until the secondary anchor crew confirms the replacement cable is seated. They're already on their way up. I called them 4 minutes ago." Vance pushed himself off the seating barrier. He stared at the old man. His face moved through several expressions in rapid, uncontrolled succession. Confusion, recognition, the specific, nauseating recalibration of a man who is realizing in real time that the map he has been using to navigate the last 6 months is not a map of the actual territory. "Who?" he started. He stopped. He started again. "Who called you what secondary crew? You're a..." He gestured at the hearing aid on the stage apron ledge, at the headphones around the old man's neck, at the plain, unremarkable clothing. "You're a sound technician. You're contracted through Meridian Audio. I have your paperwork." "You have paperwork," the old man said. He turned from the stage to look at Vance for the first time. "That's correct." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He produced a small, slim card case. He opened it. He removed a single card and held it out toward Vance between 2 fingers. "My name is Robert Sterling. I own Meridian Audio. I also own the 14 companies that co-sponsor this summit, the technology licensing firm that holds the patents. Your keynote speaker will be presenting tonight in the 40-year lease on this building." He paused. "The paperwork is accurate. The job title is not." Vance did not take the card. He looked at it. He looked at the old man. He looked at the hearing aid on the ledge. He looked at the control panel where Elias stood with both hands on the override controls and the override successful text burning green on the display above him. He looked at Toby. Toby looked back at him with the steady, careful expression of someone who had been watching a man walk toward a cliff for 6 hours and had finally watched him go over. "I don't," Vance said. He stopped. He tried again. "I don't understand what's happening." "I know," Sterling said. He returned the card to his case. He returned the case to his jacket. He was not unkind when he said it. He was not warm either. He was precise. "That's been the problem since March." He turned back toward the stage. He looked up at the rig. He looked at the remaining cables still vibrating faintly under their redistributed load. He looked at Elias. "How long can you hold it?" "Another 20 minutes, Elias said. His voice was unchanged, still level, still factual. The hands on the controls had not shifted. "The hydraulic pressure is stable, but the left secondary winch is running warm. I'd want the replacement cable seated before I release the differential." Sterling nodded. He turned back to the hall entrance. 3 men in gray technical coveralls were already coming through the main doors at a controlled jog. They carried a coiled replacement cable between them and a hydraulic tensioning tool. They moved with the specific, efficient purposefulness of people who had been briefed before they arrived. Sterling watched them come. He pointed to the stage-left anchor cluster without speaking. They went directly to it. "You called them before the rig dropped," Elias said. It was not a question. Sterling turned back to look at him. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise. The recognition of something confirmed. "I called them when you entered the bypass sequence," he said. "I've been watching the stage-left anchor since 9 this morning. I saw the geometric deviation on the third cable at approximately the same time you did, I suspect." He looked at Elias with the particular attention of a man who has found something specific he was looking for. "I wanted to see what you would do with it." Vance made a sound. It was not quite a word. It was the sound of a man whose stomach has dropped below the floor. "You," he said. He was looking at Sterling. "You've been here, all day. You've been here and you watched." He stopped. He started again. His voice had lost its precision. It was rough now, uncertain, stripped of the smooth, practiced confidence that had been its primary instrument for 6 months. "You watched all of it." "Yes," Sterling said. "The cables," Vance said. "The Elias on the stage when you were there for all of—" "Yes," Sterling said again. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Above them, the technical crew had reached the stage-left anchor cluster. The team lead called down in a clear professional voice. "Secondary anchor seated. Cable tensioning in approximately 4 minutes, Mr. Sterling." "Thank you, Marcus," Sterling said. He looked up. He used the man's first name without pause or reference, naturally, immediately, the way you use the name of someone you know. Vance heard it. He registered it. He understood in that moment the full geometry of what he had been moving through for 6 months without seeing. That every person Sterling had placed in this building had been placed with intention. That the deaf technician in the back row had been there not despite being overlooked, but because being overlooked was the point. That the audit had not been of the building or the equipment or the catering layout. It had been of him. He looked at Elias. Elias was still at the controls. His uniform was damp and stained. His hands were on the override panel. The override successful text reflected off the surface of his scarred knuckles in green. He was looking at the anchor crew working above him. I was not looking at Vance. He had not looked at Vance since before the rig dropped. His attention was on the problem on the system, on the cables and the load and the hydraulic pressure readout. It had been on nothing else since the moment he dropped the pink slip in the corridor and started moving. Vance opened his mouth. He was going to say something to Elias. Something that began with justification, with context, with the particular verbal architecture of a man trying to build a retroactive case for his own behavior. He could feel the words forming, the familiar machinery of his own self-defense assembling itself automatically, efficiently from long practice. Sterling spoke first. "Don't," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Vance when he said it. He was still watching the anchor crew. The single syllable landed in the hall with the weight of a door closing. Clean, final, without drama. Vance closed his mouth. The tensioning tool engaged above them. The sound it made was a deep, rhythmic, hydraulic pulse, deliberate and powerful, driving the replacement cable into its seated position at the anchor bracket. Each pulse was followed by a brief silence, then another pulse, then silence. The pattern continued for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. In that time, nobody in the main hall spoke. Toby stood at the main board platform. Vance stood near the seating barrier. Sterling stood at the stage apron. Elias stood at the control panel with both hands on the override controls, holding the weight of the rig steady through the hydraulic system, watching the pressure readout, making small adjustments. "Cable seated," Marcus called. "Tensioning confirmed. Load transfer in 30 seconds. "Copy," Elias said. He waited 30 seconds. He watched the load distribution numbers shift on the display as the replacement cable took its share of the weight. He watched the differential narrow. He watched the primary and secondary readings converge toward balance. When the numbers reached within 2% of calibrated specification, he released the override controls. Slowly, evenly. He did not let go all at once. He bled the hydraulic pressure out in a controlled, graduated release, the way you lower something heavy onto uncertain ground. Carefully, without assumption. The rig settled. It moved upward 3 inches as the replacement cable drew it back toward its calibrated position. It stopped. It hung, still balanced, silent, exactly where it was designed to be. The cables were taut and even and catching the stage lighting in clean parallel lines across the ceiling. The hall was quiet. Elias stepped back from the control panel. He exhaled once. He lowered his hands to his sides. He looked at the rig. He looked at the load distribution display. The numbers were correct. He looked at the rig again out of something older than professional habit, something closer to the instinct that makes a builder look one more time at what he has made or saved just to confirm that it is real. It was real. Sterling walked up the stage steps. He crossed to the control panel wing. He stood beside Elias and looked at the display. He looked at the rig. He looked at the control panel, at the plexiglass cover still open on its hinge, at the bypass sequence still showing on the entry log display. He was quiet for a moment. "Which deployment?" he said. Elias looked at him. He registered the question without surprise. The kind of man who could identify a military bypass sequence from an observation position 40 meters away already knew what he was looking at when he watched Elias work. "Second," Elias said. "Combat engineering, bridge and infrastructure, 14 years. Sterling nodded. He looked at the rig once more. He looked at Elias's hands, at the scarred knuckles, at the faded uniform, at the name tag with its single word above the empty breast pocket where a pocket watch no longer rested. He turned toward the hall. Vance was still at the seating barrier. He had not moved. His clipboard was hanging from his left hand. His posture had changed completely. The upright, deliberate architecture of his usual bearing had collapsed inward. His shoulders had dropped. His chin was down. He looked like a man whose skeleton had quietly left the room and taken everything with it. I was watching Sterling walk toward him with the expression of someone who already knows the verdict and is waiting for the sentence. Sterling stopped 3 feet from him. He looked at Vance for a long moment. He did not perform the moment. He did not build to it. He was a man who had been in enough serious rooms to know that the most powerful thing you can do when the outcome is already determined is simply to state it. "Your executive access is revoked," Sterling said. His voice was even quiet and completely without anger. Anger would have given Vance something to push against. Sterling offered him nothing. "Your employment with this organization and all affiliate organizations is terminated effective now. Marcus will collect your credentials." He glanced at the stage. Marcus was already descending. "I'll be contacting the Industry Association this evening. The incident will be on record." He paused for one beat. "The watch will be on record, too." Vance's face moved. Something in it broke along a line that had probably been there for a long time. "I want to," he started. "I know," Sterling said. He turned away. The conversation was finished. Vance's mouth was still open, still forming the architecture of something, an explanation, an apology, a negotiation, any structure that might bear weight. But Sterling had already turned. And a billionaire does not negotiate with bullies. He simply removes them from the equation and continues. Marcus arrived at the base of the stage steps. He held out his hand. He did not speak. He did not need to. Vance looked at Marcus's hand. He looked at his own platinum access badge clipped to his lapel beside the recording device where 6 hours of narrated corrections were saved to a memory card that would now never be acted upon. He unclipped the badge. He placed it in Marcus's hand. The badge was smooth, heavy, platinum-bordered, engraved with his name and title in clean sans-serif font. It made a small sound when Marcus closed his fingers around it. Toby heard it from the main board platform. He watched Vance's hand come away from Marcus's empty now and return to his side. He watched Vance look at the floor. He watched the particular quality of a man standing inside the full consequences of himself with nowhere to move and nothing left to manage. Vance did not look at Elias. He could not. He turned. He walked toward the main hall entrance. His shoes struck the floor. Click, click, click. The same sound as this morning, the same rhythm. But something fundamental had changed in what the sound meant, in what it communicated about the man making it. This morning it had been authority. Now it was just a man walking out of a room. The main hall doors opened. They closed. The echo ran the full length of the convention center and faded into the high ceiling. Then it was gone. Sterling stood at the edge of the stage apron for a moment after the doors closed. He did not watch Vance leave. He had already turned away before the footsteps reached the exit. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes on the main hall, on the curved rows of VIP seating, on the dressed catering stations, on the polished stage floor, and the lighting rig above it, now level, now still, now holding exactly the weight it had been designed to hold. He looked at all of it with the quiet, comprehensive attention of a man taking inventory of something he has built over a long time and cares about deeply. Then he turned to Elias. Elias was still in the stage left wing. He had not moved from the control panel area. He was standing with his back against the wing wall, his arms at his sides, his hands open and still. His uniform was damp at the knees, stained at the cuffs, marked across the shoulder where the cable coils had pressed their weight into the fabric through the morning. His name tag caught the edge of the stage lighting at a slight angle. The single word above the empty breast pocket was clearly legible from where Sterling stood. Sterling walked to him. He crossed the stage without ceremony, without the particular self-conscious awareness of his own movement that powerful men often carry into significant moments. He walked the way he had walked down the center aisle, directly, without performance. He stopped in front of Elias and extended his right hand. Elias looked at the hand. He looked at Sterling. He took it. Sterling's grip was firm, unhurried, and complete. Not the brief instrumental handshake of a transaction, the handshake of a man who means it. He held it for 3 full seconds. He looked at Elias while he held it directly without the slight angle of deflection that most people use when eye contact becomes too specific. He looked at him the way you look at someone you are seeing clearly for the first time and finding that the reality is larger than you had estimated. He released the grip. He kept his eyes on Elias. "Before I say what I'm going to say," Sterling began, "I want you to understand that I have been in this building since 5:45 this morning." He paused. "I watched you arrive. I watched you work. I watched every interaction with Vance from the equipment table in the back row and later from the VIP seating." He was quiet for a moment. "I saw the watch." Elias said nothing. His face did not move. But something behind his eyes shifted briefly, involuntarily, the way a muscle moves when something presses directly against an injury. "I'm sorry," Sterling said. He said it simply, without qualification, without the softening apparatus of explanation, just the 2 words placed directly in front of the thing they were responding to. "That was a piece of your family. It deserved better than what happened to it in this building today." Elias looked at the floor for a moment. He looked back up. His jaw was set. His eyes were clear. "It was an object," he said. His voice was steady. It was the steadiest it had been all day, which meant it was costing him the most. "It was your grandfather's," Sterling said, "and your father's, and yours." He held Elias's eyes. "Objects that carry that kind of history are not just objects." He paused. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He produced his card case. He opened it. He held a card toward Elias, the same card he had shown Vance with the same 2-fingered extension but held differently, offered not presented. "I'd like to tell you what I want to offer you if you're willing to hear it." Elias took the card. He looked at it. He turned it over. He held it in his scarred hands with the careful attention of a man who has learned to read things slowly, to not assign meaning before meaning has been earned. He looked back at Sterling. He nodded once. "I run infrastructure," Sterling said. "Not this building, not this summit, the actual infrastructure. 17 active construction projects across 9 countries. Bridges, load-bearing structures, emergency response systems, things that have to hold under conditions that are not forgiving for people who cannot afford for them to fail." He paused. He looked at the control panel. He looked at the rig. He looked at Elias. "I've been looking for a global infrastructure director for 14 months. I've interviewed 22 candidates. Every one of them knew the theory. Not one of them knew what you demonstrated today between 2 o'clock and 3:45. He was quiet. "I'd like to offer you the position." Elias stood with that for a moment. He let it arrive. He did not rush toward it or away from it. He stood with it the way he had stood with the weight of the cables that morning, absorbing it through his frame, finding its center of gravity, determining whether it was real. His hands were still at his sides. His face was still. Behind his eyes the arithmetic was running, not doubt, verification. The specific, careful process of a man who has been in enough situations where things that sounded like rescue turned out to be something else. "My wife," he said. His voice was quiet, direct. He said the two words the way you say the most important thing first before anything else can crowd in ahead of it. "Full medical coverage," Sterling said. He did not hesitate. He did not reach for a notebook or a device or any administrative apparatus. He said it the way he had said everything else today, as a fact, already decided, already true, comprehensive, her current treatment team, her current facility, her current care plan. No interruption, no transition period, no gap. He held Elias's eyes. "I reviewed your employment file this morning. I know what her situation is. I know what the insurance card in your pocket represents." He paused. "It will not be an issue." Elias looked at him. He looked at him for a long time. 4 seconds. 5. The kind of looking that is not observation but verification. The kind that belongs to men who have learned to distinguish between what people say and what they mean by examining the gap between the two. He looked at Sterling's face and found no gap. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. It was the smallest possible movement. It was enormous. He exhaled. It was a single breath, slow and complete, the kind that has been waiting a long time to happen. It moved through him from somewhere deep and compressed, from the place where 8 months of held tension and managed fear and swallowed pride had been stored with the careful, disciplined economy of a man who could not afford to let any of it show. It came out quietly, without drama, like a door finally gently opening. "Yes," he said. His voice was the same, level, direct, unchanged in its register. But something in it was different. Something had returned to it that had been absent for a long time. It took a moment to identify. It was the particular sound of a man speaking without a cost attached to the words. Sterling extended his hand again. Elias took it. They shook. It was brief this time. The brevity of something that does not need ceremony because it is already real. Toby had not moved from the main board platform. He had been standing in the same position since before the rig settled, since before Marcus descended the stage steps, since before the main hall doors closed behind Vance's last footstep. He had watched all of it without moving, without speaking, without looking away. The bolt was still in his hand, pressed into his palm by the pressure of his closed fist. He had not thought about it since he picked it up from the stage floor 2 hours ago. He thought about it now. He opened his hand and looked at it. The hexagonal edges had pressed their shape permanently into the skin of his palm. He would keep it. He knew that without deliberating. He would keep it for the same reason people keep things that are connected to moments they need to remain able to verify actually happened. He put it back in his pocket. He closed his fingers around it one more time. He looked at Elias standing in the stage left wing in his faded, stained uniform with Sterling's card in his scarred hand, and something restored in his bearing that had not been visible this morning. He looked at the abandoned mop handle leaning against the corridor wall, still visible through the wing entrance. He looked at the stage floor where the bright pink termination slip lay flat against the wet concrete face up where Elias had let it fall. He looked at Vance's platinum access badge. Marcus had set it on the stage apron ledge after taking it from Vance's hand. It lay there now, catching the stage light on its engraved surface, clean and gleaming and completely without power. Directly beside it in the same light was the hearing aid Sterling had removed and set down when he no longer needed the disguise. 2 objects side by side on the same ledge. One that had meant everything to the man who wore it. One that had never meant what its wearer believed. Elias looked at them too. He picked up the hearing aid. He handed it to Sterling without a word. Sterling took it and returned it to his jacket pocket with the card case. Elias looked at the badge. He did not pick it up. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at his mop handle in the corridor. Then he looked at Sterling. "When does it start?" he said. Sterling almost smiled. It was not the almost smile of a man suppressing something. It was the almost smile of a man who has found something he was looking for and is quietly satisfied and does not need anyone to see how much. "Monday," he said. "If that works." "It works," Elias said. Sterling turned toward the hall entrance. He paused at the edge of the wing. He looked back at the room, at the rig, at the control panel, at the override successful text still visible on the display. He looked at it for one moment. Then he walked out into the main hall and toward the entrance, unhurried hands clasped behind his back, moving through the building the way he had moved through it all day, like a man who owns it, because he does. Marcus and his crew began the final cable inspection from the ceiling anchors downward. Their voices moved quietly through the rigging above, professional, specific, without urgency. The summit was in 4 hours. The rig was stable. The stage was ready. Toby picked up his tablet from the floor where he had dropped it. He checked it. The screen was intact. He looked at the open task log on the screen at the list of corrections Vance had narrated into his recording device over 6 hours of walkthrough. He looked at the list for a moment. He closed the application. He opened a new blank document. He sat down on the edge of the main board platform. He did not know what he was going to write. He started writing anyway because some things need to be recorded before the details soften, and what he had seen today was not something he was willing to let soften. Elias walked to the corridor entrance. He picked up his mop handle. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at the pink termination slip on the floor beside the stage. He crossed to it. He picked it up. He folded it once. He put it in his right hip pocket beside the small envelope of watch gears. He did not know why he kept it. He kept it anyway. Perhaps because a man should hold on to evidence of the things he survived. Perhaps because the distance between that pink slip and Monday morning was a distance worth being able to measure. He looked at the stage one final time, at the rig level and still, at the light it threw across the polished floor, at the empty curved rows of seating waiting for the summit guests, at the place where Vance had stood with his clipboard and his certainty and his $2,000 shoes and all the invisible, uncounted authority of a man who had never once considered what the room would do without him. He picked up his bucket. He walked back into the service corridor. The fluorescent light overhead was still flickering. Nobody had filed the maintenance request. He set the bucket down beside the drain. He looked at the flickering light. He picked up the mop. He began to work. There were 3 more drains in this corridor, and the summit was in 4 hours, and the floor needed to be clean. He worked steadily without hurry in the flickering light of the service corridor in the last hours of the last shift of the last day he would ever spend invisible. He walked out the doors knowing exactly what it meant for the first time in a long time to be completely, irrevocably seen. Absolute, breathtaking justice. If you were in Elias's shoes watching the man who crushed your grandfather's watch cower in terror, would you have stepped in to save his life? Let me know what you would do in the comments below. If Elias's incredible discipline and military honor restored your faith in humanity, subscribe to join our community for more stories where karma never misses an address.